After breakfast we drove 45 miles to Hampton Court Palace. The palace originally belonged to Cardinal Wolsey, who was Henry VIII Lord Chancellor, but Henry confiscated the palace from him. As you enter, you go through 3 courtyards, the base court, the clock court, and the fountain court. The tour includes entrance to the apartments of the King and Queen and the apartments of later monarchs. William III and Mary II had Christopher Wren design additional Baroque-style sections of the palace. The two were also responsible for the addition of many of the gardens that surround the palace. George I created an impressive suite of rooms for his son George and his wife Caroline. The palace was used for lavish entertainment. In 1838, Queen Victoria opened the palace to the public. As you tour the palace, you see the grand staircase, the royal chapel, the kitchens as well as the 3 distinct period rooms, Tudor, William II, and Georgian. The king's apartments are a series of rooms each of which had a specific purpose and function. The queen's apartments were arranged in a similar fashion. After we completed the tour of the palace, we enjoyed strolling through the several gardens that enveloped the palace. We then drove back to our hotel. We drove about 20 miles south to Chartwell House, which was the country estate of Winston Churchill. When you arrive, you are assigned a time to visit the house. Ours was 11 a.m., so we had time to stroll through the extensive gardens on the property. The origins of the estate reach back to 1382 when the property was called Well Street. Churchill bought the property in 1922 and it became his retreat from the responsibilities of the Prime Minister. The upkeep on the estate drained him of his fortunes, and in 1946 he sold the property to the National Trust with the condition that he and his wife could lease the property for 50 years. This allowed them to remain in the house until their deaths in 1965 and 1977. The tour of the house is self-guided so you can view the rooms at your own pace. There is a volunteer stationed in each room to answer questions. There are many photographs of the family throughout the house and placards that give information on family members. We found the house to be tastefully done and can understand why Churchill loved to spend time here away from his hectic schedule in London. Churchill was an avid painter. He once said, "When I get to heaven I intend to spend a considerable portion of my first million years in painting, and so get to the bottom of the subject." Leaving Chartwell House we drove 3 miles to Emmett's Garden. Emmett's Garden was open farmland until 1860 when the Preston House was built. The name Emmett is a local word for ant and may refer to the giant anthills that covered the property until the 1950s. The gardens were initially laid out between 1893 and 1895. They were purchased by American geologist Charles Watson Boise in 1927 and he bequeathed them to the National Trust in 1964. Extensive damage was done in the Great Storm of 1987, but the National Trust has replanted many of the damaged plants. The gardens are divided into several zones, each of which has its own unique character. We then drove the 17 miles back to our hotel in Dartford. We drove 49 miles south to the Battle of Hastings site. It was on this field that the fate of England was decided on October 14, 1066. King Harold had marched his forces from a victorious battle in the north to the high ground a few miles outside Hastings. An evenly matched army of William, Duke of Normandy, faced him on the opposite ridgeline. The battle lasted most of the day with the English forces withstanding several frontal attacks. But when Harold was killed on this spot, the English forces retreated in defeat. William was crowned king on Christmas Day and ruled until his death in 1087. The Benedictine Abbey of Battle was begun in 1071 and dedicated in 1094. King William established it to commemorate those who had died in the battle and to pay penance for the bloodshed that ensued in his conquest of England. It was one of the richest monastic centres in all England until it was dissolved by Henry VIII in 1538. Henry gave to abbey and land to his friend Anthony Browne, who turned the abbey into a great manor house. It remained this way until 1922, when it was leased to an exclusive girls' school. There were special activities taking place the day we visited. This included the Clash of the Knights that required two teams to knock the headgear off the leader of the opposing team. The participants were in full armor on a very hot day and many were exhausted from the effort. While amusing entertainment, it in no way resembled the ferocious battle that must have taken place here in 1066.
We weren't joking, ladies and gentlemen, there are no rules. Smash of shield on shield. Oh, the green crossbow, they're almost caught on the heart. Good. He's on the run, ladies and gentlemen!
We drove about 8 miles north to Bodiam Castle. We avoided the long walk from the visitor center to the castle by securing a shuttle ride with a staff member. We were given some of the castle's history on the ride from the visitor center. The castle was built in 1385 by Sir Edward d'Alengrigg, who had fought in the 100 Years' War against France. The moat and four-corner towers are similar to French designs he may have seen while fighting in France. While built for defense against a French invasion, its structure, detail and location suggests it was built to impress those who visited. The owners supported the House of Lancaster during the Wars of the Roses and surrendered the castle to the House of York in 1483. The castle was given back to the family in 1485 when Henry VII was crowned. Once again the owners supported the losing side in the English Civil War and the castle was sold to pay off debts and taxes. Subsequent owners began a series of restorations in 1829. The property was donated to the National Trust in 1925. The castle has an ideal setting in the valley of the River Rother. We continued 44 miles north back to our hotel. We drove 45 miles to the city of Canterbury and parked the car in a public parking lot. From there we caught a bus into town to visit the cathedral. The city council had made this a free day to park and ride. This was Sunday and services were being conducted in the cathedral. This meant that we could not enter until 11:30. We spent our time walking the cobblestone pedestrian streets of Old Canterbury. We passed one spot where you could rent a boat to travel some of the city's canals. There was even a Five Guys hamburger joint on the main drag. We were able to see some of the old city walls. We returned to the cathedral after services were over and entered the grounds. We did a walk around the outside of the cathedral to admire the stonework. The cathedral was founded in 597 by Augustine, who was sent to England by Pope Gregory I. Original buildings on the site have been destroyed over the years. The current cathedral was begun in 1070 after a fire destroyed the cathedral in 1067. We entered the cathedral in the rear near the cloister area and toured the lower levels first. The cathedral is large and we took our time wandering through it. Canterbury has some of the oldest stained glass windows in England. Perhaps the most famous event in the cathedral's history was the assassination of Thomas Becket on December 29, 1170. The murder took place in this room, which is the most visited spot in the cathedral. Becket had many quarrels with Henry II, who supposedly sent 4 knights to eliminate Becket. After finishing our tour of the cathedral, we walked a few blocks to the 3 Tons pub and had a very good Sunday roast. Returning to the car, we drove the remaining 18 miles to our hotel in Folkestone.
We drove 11 miles up the coast to Dover Castle. The castle sits atop Castle Hill, which has been a strategic location throughout English history, because it is the nearest point to France. The hill has been occupied since the Iron Age. The Romans built 2 forts here in the 1st and 2nd centuries. William the Conqueror added to the castle in 1067, but the current castle is largely the work of Henry II. The Romans built this lighthouse in 130 AD to aid in navigation to their fleet of ships arriving in England. The Church of St. Mary in Castro dates from around 1000 AD. Its size suggests that it had a royal patron, possibly Godwin, who was the father of King Harold. I climbed to the top of the castle and from this vantage point had a commanding view of the castle grounds and the nearby port of Dover. In one section of the castle, you can descend underground to a set of tunnels that date back to the Middle Ages. In a separate tour, you can explore the tunnels that were used to conduct the evacuation of Allied soldiers from the beach at Dunkirk. The presentation is a unique combination of static displays and videos of the evacuation. From the castle, we drove the short distance to the cliffs of Dover. From the paths atop the cliffs, you can look back to the port of Dover. There are many miles of paths along the top of the cliffs. We want just a short distance, so that we could get several views of these famous cliffs. There are tour companies that will take you on boat rides at the base of the cliffs. I believe this would be the best way to see them. From the cliffs we drove 8 more miles up the coast to Walmer Castle and Gardens. Walmer Castle is an artillery fort constructed in 1540 by Henry VIII to defend against invasion from the French. Comprising a keep and 4 circular bastions, the moated castle had 39 cannon positions on its upper levels. It was converted into a private residence in the 18th century and had several owners such as William Pitt, the Duke of Wellington, and Lord Granville. The latter is responsible for the extensive gardens that are on the property today. From Walmer Castle, we returned the 17 miles to Folkestone and had fish and chips on the dock before retiring to the hotel.